transmission lines, fuel factor bill credits, rate adjustment clauses for major unit conversions, rate reductions attributable to changes in federal law. The bill was reported to committee on Commerce and Labor with a substitute. And, Mr. Speaker, there also are floor amendments offered, a set of floor amendments offered by Delegate Toscano. There is a floor amendment offered by Delegate Rasool, and there is another floor amendment offered by Delegate Toscano.
The delegate from Scott, Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, I would move that we adopt the committee substitute.
Shall the committee substitute be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The committee substitutes agreed to. Delegate Kilgore, well.
Let's see. How are we going to take?
Clerk will report the first floor amendment.
First floor amendment offered by Delegate Toscano. The amendment has been distributed and is available online. The first one is drawn sequentially. We'll move through them in just numeric order as line 409. Those that are out there, there's a number of amendments on it. It's all distributed, but the one that begins at 409.
Mr. Speaker, could those amendments be taken up together, and could they go by temporarily? No, it's not.
Okay, the delegate then would like to consider them a block, and if they pass, they go by temporarily. Is that what the delegate would like to do?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first ask if that amendment be passed by temporarily, and then when it comes up, we can take it up as a block, because there are a lot of them, and there are a lot of line numbers, and
okay.
So I ask that it be taken by temporarily.
Okay, the motion is to take the amendment by temporarily. Okay, all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Okay, that is taken by temporarily.
Mr. Speaker, the next floor amendments up are the ones offered by Delegate Rasool to the committee substitute that's been adopted. That amendment, there's one. It has been distributed. It is available online.
The delegate from Roanoke City, Delegate Rasool, and since we're going to have a lot of amendments, et cetera, if everyone doesn't mind hitting their speak light, it sort of helps me with your county, et cetera. So the Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If this floor amendment could go by temporarily.
Okay. All those in favor of Delegate Rasool's floor amendment going by temporarily signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. Okay, that goes by temporarily.
Yes, sir.
Why don't we do this, if I could? Delegate Kilgore, why don't you explain the bill? I think it put some of the floor amendments a little bit in context, at least for me.
We can do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the title self-explanatory be the... No, I'm just
all those in favor of engrossing the bill?
Yeah, engross the bill and pass it on. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 58, I admit, is a far-reaching, important bill. And before we get started, I want to thank my chief co-patron, the delegate from Henrico, Delegate Bagby, for helping me through this process, and Delegate Hugo, my seatmate, for working to shape the bill with measures on energy efficiency and the renewable energies that's incorporated in the bill, and also for providing the answer to the issue in the Haymarket transmission line. I appreciate your help on that. And I also want to thank the governor's office for bringing the diverse group of stakeholders together and actually resulted in a measure that got both the League of Conservation Voters and the Virginia Manufacturers Association to agree on a bill. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the delegate from Danville, Delegate Marshall, for your innovative initiatives on broadband and economic development, talking about marketing opportunities for the Commonwealth. And finally, Delegate Toscano, for your help in the committee on bringing forth the analysis of the financial impact of the grid transformation. I appreciate that amendment. So, ladies and gentlemen, House Bill 1558 does a lot of things. And, of course, all the members of Commerce and Labor, if you would stand, no, I'm just, all the members of Commerce and Labor, thank you all, thank you all. But House Bill 1558 does a number of things. First of all, it ends the rate freeze. We imposed a rate freeze 3 years ago when we were in uncertain times, didn't know what was coming about as it relates to closing power plants, and we thought at that time that it would be the right thing for the Commonwealth to do. It also provides an immediate bill credit to customers, $130 million from Dominion on July 1st, $10 million from ABCO in August of this year, an additional $67 million from Dominion on January 1st, 2019, and that would be an advance on any amounts the State Corporation Commission determines to be due in the triennial review in 2021. This is very important right here. It passes through the tax reform immediately, the benefits of the tax reform. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that a lot of utilities are not doing this and do not have to do this. But Dominion will be reducing its rates annually by $125 million on July 1st, ABCO by $50 million on July 1st, and the SCC, this is important, will be able to true those numbers up because we think those numbers are going to be higher at the end of the day, and that will change the rates better for the consumers. And all these benefits are going to be passed on through the Virginia customers. It provides that there's no rate increase for Dominion in the first triennial review. It allows refunds and rate reductions in each triennial review, provided, however, the rate reduction for Dominion will be $50 million in the first review. And there is no, in the old law, there was a requirement that there must be over-earnings in 2 consecutive reviews. That is no longer the case. If they're over-earning in that first one, you get, the customers will get a refund. The bill creates a pilot program for the Haymarket transmission line. I traveled there to meet with Delegate Hugo on that issue, and thank him for his leadership and the members of the Prince William delegation for that. But most of all, ladies and gentlemen, 1558 is going to transform the grid. And it's going to transform the electric distribution grid, moving us from the old technology that has been put in years ago when we probably had black and white TVs and things of that, and rotary dial phones, to a modern grid with two-way communications and protection from cyber attacks, etc. It's going to enable utilities to accommodate renewables, generations on the grid, and help us reduce outages. And I can relate to an outage. I had an outage Saturday night at home from 6 o'clock till 9:30 Sunday morning. So this is very important. I am certain that this will be very important as we move forward. It's going to transform how we look at renewables. The bill includes 5,000 megawatts worth of renewables, that's solar and wind, and it's going to add a lot to the grid over the next 10 years. It's also going to transform how we use electricity with commitments for $1 billion, that's with a B, in energy efficiency programs from both Dominion and ABCO. It also it continues the energy share and weatherization program that's so important to our folks who are on fixed incomes, the folks who are not able to pay those high energy bills. And it includes a pledge from Dominion to increase its energy share and weatherization program to $13 million a year for 10 years. And that's $130 million directly from Dominion shareholders. Other states have undertaken such a transformation of their grid. and have done so with surcharges, or what we call RACs, rate adjustment clauses. And that's those additions to the taxpayers' bills. We're not doing that in Virginia. We're going to require that these are included in the base rates and not on a rate adjustment clause. Just to our south, Duke Energy just did this in North Carolina. They're going to be doing power grid upgrades, and it's going to cost average residential customer there $3,600 over 10 years just to pay for that. So that's going to be an addition to their bill. We could have done the same thing in Virginia, but it would have been an addition to the bill. House Bill 1558 is going to keep our rates stable. It's all going to be, the base rate's not going to go up. It's going to be predictable, and it's going to be low. The bill proposes a new model, and that's what we're talking about. It establishes a customer credit reinvestment for investments that the state corporation has to improve in the electric distribution grid transformation projects. So each one of these grid transformation projects must go to the State Corporation Commission. They approve it, and then Dominion or AEP begins to build that particular project. The capital invested in these projects becomes part of the utilities assets without any change in base rates. And in fact, the bill expressly prohibits any increase in base rates based upon such investments. In the triennial review, if the utility has made sufficient investments to offset the 100% of the amount it earned in excess of its authorized rate of return, 70% of those earnings are not eligible for refund to customers, nor may the utility retain its 30% share. That's under OLAW. Now it allows the investments to be made from existing revenues from existing base rates, keeping bases low and stable, and no rate adjustment clause. There's been objections to this model. I've heard them all, that the utility is being paid twice for these investments, that we're double dipping. This is not what the bill does. A utility gets revenue from three sources: first, base rate, a rate adjustment clause, or a fuel charge. Well, if we're going to renewables, there's not going to be a fuel charge because they're not paying for fuel. So it's not going to increase fuel cost if you're using these reinvestment credits for those eligible investments in renewables. And the eligible investments cannot be used in a rate adjustment clause, as we just stated. So the bill expressly provides that investments in the SEC, that the SEC approves for recovery pursuant to a rate adjustment clause, cannot be included in the investments eligible for the reinvestment credit. So we don't have to worry about double dipping. Finally, the eligible investments for the reinvestment credit cannot be a basis for an increase in base rates during this 10-year period. Now tell me where that you can buy something today and where you can get into a contract today and that contract just stays the same for 10 years. Not many times can you do that without it going up. What this model does, it gives us an opportunity to accomplish our goals. First of all, to improve the grid without adding to Virginia's bills. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill provides a path forward where the grid is secure, resilient against natural disaster, and we've got to worry about, if you recall last fall, what happened down in Florida, Texas, other places, and where renewables become an essential component of our balanced electricity generation portfolio, where energy efficiency can help us reduce their bills, where power is reliable, rarely interrupted and rapidly restored at a cost that all Virginians can afford. I hope that you will join me in voting for and sending House Bill 1558 on to its third reading, engrossing it and send it on. It has such broad support from a vast array of groups, so I hope that you will engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Let's get back to the floor amendments. If the clerk will report the next floor amendment.
The last set of floor amendments, Mr. Speaker, offered by Delegate Toscano, they're the ones that begin at line 1009. They have been distributed and are available online.
The delegate from Charlottesville, Delegate Toscano, explain his floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, House. In explaining this amendment, I first of all want to thank the 60 or so members of this body who helped me put together this amendment. And I would like to also commend the gentleman from Scott for doing all this work on this bill, because this is probably one of the most significant pieces of legislation we'll consider certainly this year and maybe over the next 5-10 years. I mean, it really is significant, because there's no doubt that we're going to have to transform the grid in fundamental ways, and the utility models that are out there are probably not suited for the next couple of decades. So it's very important that we get this right. There's a lot that is good in the bill, particularly the emphasis on renewables and the investments in weatherization and efficiency. But one of the things that concerns a lot of people is this so-called double dip. Now, this is pretty complicated stuff. When we get into a world of complicated stuff, we sometimes go to our experts. And one of our experts is the State Corporation Commission. Now, Dominion takes the position, and I think utilities take the position that there is no double dip in this bill. There are other groups out there who say that there is a double dip in this bill. So let's clarify it by this amendment that you have before you. If there isn't a double dip in the bill, passing the amendment will clarify that fact. If there is a double dip in this bill, passing the amendment will fix the problem. So who are the experts who are telling us that there is a double dip? Well, it's the State Corporation Commission. These are the people that we empower with giving us information about how rates impact consumers. And the way they put it is very clear. They say, and I quote, suppose that the utility invests $200 million in new grid transformation, something we have to do. Say it's smart meters, resiliency, good things. And that utility investment costs $200 million. Now, and then the utility is found to have over-earned or over-recovered $200 million in a subsequent rate case. The utility keeps the $200 million in over-earnings to pay for the project, but still adds $200 million in new capital assets to its books. So you see what's happening. It takes the $200 million and invests it in a capital asset. Why is that important? Well, it's important because the utility gets a return on its investment, a return on its capital asset, 10%. That is part of the double dip. And the other part of the double dip is, of course, how the customer credit offset works, because if you have over-earned and you use those over-earnings to offset your investment in this grid modernization, you get to recapture money that you used for the grid modernization. That's what the State Corporation told us, and that's why this amendment is before you, because it says that any costs associated with grid transformation projects that are subject to any customer credit reinvestment may not be recovered through the utility rates for generation. That's what Dominion and the other utilities are telling us, that is already in the bill. This language further clarifies that. So if you think it's already in the bill, you can vote for this amendment because it clarifies that these things are not going to be recovered through the utilities rates for generation. Now, admittedly, this is pretty tough legalese, but just look at the words. They may not be recovered through utility rates for generation and distribution. That's the essence of the double dip, preventing the double dip. I hope that you will support this amendment, fix the double dip, and then we can go on to the rest of the bill and make some decisions about that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Scott, Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you not vote for the amendment. Dave Albo told me a long time ago, some of these things are they're bills that are very technical, and the only way that you can try to explain a technical bill is to try to explain it like you don't know what's going on. Well, here's the way that I would explain this bill as it relates to double dipping. You go into a car dealership and you have a used car with hundreds of thousands of miles on it, okay? And they look at it and look at it again, and how they kick the tires and all that. But then they say, but sir, you could have this new car for the same rate that you're paying right now for the old car. Who's not going to jump onto that? And that's basically what we're doing here. You're going to get a new grid. You're going to get all this investment into the grid for the same price that you've got going right now. So I would say that we do not need this amendment, and I would ask that you vote no.
Shall the floor amendment offered by Delegate Toscano be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Chair is in doubt. Ayes and nays are called for. Shall the floor amendment offered by Delegate Toscano be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 55, noes 41, abstentions 2.
Ayes 55, noes 41, abstentions 2. That amendment's agreed to. Clerk will report the next floor amendment.
Mr. Speaker, returning to the original first set of amendments offered by Delegate Toscano. Mr. Speaker, returning to that section, that is the group of amendments that begin on line 409. I'm advised that these amendments have been distributed to everyone, but for whatever reason, they're not available online presently.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask these go by temporarily?
Delegate Toscano moves that those amendments go by temporarily. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. They go by temporarily. Clerk will report the next set of amendments by Delegate Rasool.
The next set of amendments offered by Delegate Rasool. One amendment, it begins on line 708. Those amendments have been distributed and are available online.
Delegate from Roanoke City, Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, speaking to this floor amendment. So we've heard a couple of issues potentially with the bill, and one of the issues that's been outlined is the charging for undergrounding. I think undergrounding is a good thing. So taking our power lines and undergrounding them, especially what Dominion has talked about, some of the lines that are not very reliable. I think it's a really good idea to be able to do that. So with my amendment, we're allowing them to do that, continuing down the path. We're also continuing to circumvent the SCC. We're saying that this is okay, it's in the public interest. But many of you might have heard the math behind this undergrounding. There are approximately 2.5 million customers for Dominion. And the cost per customer, as it says on line 708, is $20,000. And if you do some simple math, that is approximately $50 billion for this undergrounding project. Now, the SCC in 2014, their staff experts said that a reasonable and prudent test said that this proposal would be about $2 billion. The math that we're proposing is $50 billion. So all we're trying to do with this amendment is change the $20,000 to $1,000. Now think about that. We're just saying that each customer is going to have to pay an extra $1,000 instead of $20,000 to underground. So I hope that we will go with the SCC on this and just be prudent about the amount of money. We're for undergrounding. We're letting them circumvent the SCC on this. We just want to make sure they don't have this virtual blank check with regards to undergrounding costs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Scott, Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, I do not believe it says that somebody's going to be paying $20,000 or $1,000. That's the cost, that it cannot exceed the cost per customer in that particular area. This is something that was negotiated with the governor's office and all the stakeholders as it relates to the Haymarket line, that line that goes through Haymarket. So I would ask that you reject this amendment offered by the delegate from Roanoke City. And
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, speak to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman brought forth, or the delegate mentioned $50 billion. That's a unique number. That's the first time anybody's ever presented a number of that size and discussion about what we're trying to do here. That number has no relationship to reality. This bill, what we are trying to do is accommodate Prince William, one of our neighborhoods, one of the places with a program that will help the economy of Northern Virginia, accomplish what we're trying to do, but also preserve the nature of this corridor. And there is the chairman here is pointing to that you were talking 50 billion. You're talking a magnitude of 100 times what it actually could cost. I'm not quite sure where you got that number, but we look forward to further discussions. But I hope you would reject this amendment.
Delegate from Roanoke City, Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that we...
Delegate like to speak again.
I'm sorry, speaking to the amendment, Mr.
Delegate
Speaker.
has the floor.
I believe that, I'm echoing many of the sentiments that the delegate from Fairfax was just mentioning, Mr. Speaker. I'm in favor and speaking in favor of undergrounding. I believe, as Dominion believes, that this is in fact $50 billion, but it would take them 100 years to actually spend that kind of money. I agree they're not going to spend $50 billion. What we're saying is why give them this blank check to do so? It's already been determined that this is about a $2 billion project. So why don't we just allow them to do the project, give the thumbs up to undergrounding, but just make sure that we do the prudent thing with taxpayer dollars, with ratepayer dollars, and say that the upper limit is going to be $2 billion on the project, which has already been established. So I hope it'll be the will of the body to accept this amendment.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a motion.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I move to pass by the amendment from the delegate from Roanoke City.
Delegate Orrock moves to pass by the amendment. Yeah, I can't tell where you're coming from.
Go ahead, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry.
Okay, you got to hit your button. Okay, Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Delegate may state it.
So I'm wondering, since this is a motion to pass by, if you'd like the amendment, you would then vote red, right, no, on the motion to pass by if you support the amendment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right. All those in favor of passing by the amendment from Delegate Rasool will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. Chair is in doubt. Got yelling at me. Shall the amendment offered by Delegate Rasool be passed by? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 49, noes 46.
Ayes 49, noes 46. The amendment is passed by.
Mr. Speaker,
Delegate from Montgomery, Delegate Rush.
having voted on the prevailing side to delegate from Charlottesville amendment, I move that we reconsider that.
Delegate Rush moves that having voted on the prevailing side by which we pass the amendment from Delegate Toscano.
Mr. Speaker.
Floor amendment. Yes.
I have a parliamentary inquiry,
Delegate may state it.
or maybe a point of information. Are there further amendments at the desk after we decide this question?
There is a further set of amendments, I think, from Delegate Toscano.
All right, thank you.
Okay, having voted on the prevailing side by which we passed Delegate Toscano's floor amendment, the motion is to reconsider that vote. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Okay, the division is called for. All those in favor passing by the amendment by Delegate Toscano.
Mr. Speaker.
Reconsider, my apologies. Raise your right hand. This is for reconsideration.
There's enough.
Okay. It's reconsidered. Okay. The delegate from Salem, Delegate Habib.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the floor, member from Delegate Toscano.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the body, this is really, really complicated stuff, and we spent a lot of time in subcommittee, a lot of time in full committee. There's a lot of us who very much agree on trying to address this double dipping issue, for lack of a better term. There's just a lot of us who are uncomfortable as we're trying to do this on the floor. That said, at this point, I think the best move on this bill is for everyone to support Delegate Toscano's amendment. We think that probably tightens the language up, probably gets where we're trying to go. Again, there are numerous steps left in the bill where it goes from here, and I'm going to speak to the bill at the time of when we're voting on passage. But for now, I would encourage everybody to support this amendment from Delegate Toscano.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Speaking to the amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate has the floor.
I just want to associate myself with the remarks from the delegate from Salem. You know, the patron of this bill has assured many of us privately that he would attempt to continue to address these concerns, as the delegate from Salem indicated, going forward. And so, again, doing this on the fly like this makes some of us very uncomfortable, but I do trust the delegate from Scott when he tells us he wants to keep working on this, and I think he wanted to work on it in the original form that it was in and not on the fly like this. But with that understanding and assurance from him, we would encourage the members to vote in favor of Delegate Toscano's amendment.
Shall the floor amendment offered by Delegate Toscano be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The floor amendment is, ayes and nays are called for. Shall the floor amendment offered by Delegate Toscano be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 96, noes 1, abstentions 2.
Ayes 96, noes 1, abstentions 2. That floor amendment is agreed to. Clerk will re-report, I guess, the floor amendment.
Mr. Speaker. I can't do it.
Can't do it.
Mr. Speaker, the amendments before the body now are the group of amendments offered by separate and different set of amendments offered by Delegate Toscano. They're the ones that begin at line 409 and total 63 in all.
Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Charlottesville, Delegate Toscano.
I'd like to withdraw those amendments.
Okay, Delegate Toscano withdraws those amendments. Delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard quite a bit about the green energy investments that are going to be in this bill. The number has changed considerably throughout the course of the last month. It started off as 500 megawatts, then it went up to 2,000, then 4,000, now 5,000. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the ladies and gentlemen of this body that under current law, the SCC authorizes new capital investment based on basically what's cheapest. That's what's been holding up green energy investment in the Commonwealth of Virginia for quite a while. Green energy up until this point has not been the cheapest option. But, Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 years or so, the price of green energy has dropped like a stone. It's gone down 30% in the last 2 years, and it's continuing to fall. And I have some information here from a federal agency, the Energy Information Agency, that has the total cost of energy for a megawatt from various sources. And on average, Mr. Speaker, the cheapest fossil fuel generation facility would be an advanced combined cycle natural gas-fired power plant, and that comes out to $56.50 per megawatt of energy generated. But when you look at onshore wind, the cost for that has come down so far that it's now $52.20. So, Mr. Speaker, under current law, we're going to get this green energy investment anyway. So I would like to remind the members of this body that changing the law to create investment in green energy to get through the SEC is not necessarily needed. There are green energy projects that will pass the RIM test now. We're in a different world than we were 2 years ago. So, Mr. Speaker, having said that, I would encourage the members of this body to reject engrossment and defeat this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Salem, Delegate Habib.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, I voted against the bill in subcommittee. The bill is introduced. While I very much appreciated what the chairman and Delegate Bagby and others were trying to do, it just wasn't there. There were too many significant problems with the bill at this point. And when I voted against the bill, I outlined a series of issues that I had with the bill, and I presented those to all the various stakeholders. Again, this is not just the Dominion bill. This is a bill that affects everybody, all of our utilities, all of our ratepayers, everybody in the Commonwealth. By the time that bill got to full committee, they had addressed essentially all of the issues I raised to the point that I and others who had concerns in Commerce and Labor were able to vote for it. And frankly, I really appreciate Delegate Toscano continuing to try to work on some of the hanging issues. But because I voted against the original version and then was able to vote for the version after the amendment, some people have asked me to explain what changed to understand how the bill's improved. So, Mr. Speaker, if I may, just very briefly, a few things that have improved in this bill as it has gone, understanding there is room for improvement still. Number one, the amount of refunds for quote-unquote overpayments have increased dramatically. We are hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be refunded to our ratepayers. It expedites the payment of the taxes, the tax benefits as a result of the federal tax bill. Without this bill, those payments would be refunded in 2020 or 2021 through the rate review process. Now they get done immediately. Of course, it lifts the rate freeze. Here's one really super technical issue. Under current law, if a utility earns above what's called the collar, only 70% of that gets returned to ratepayers, 30% gets kept by the utility. We changed that from the original bill to now, and that number is now 100% of that money gets reinvested. That can be many millions of extra dollars. Instead of going to Dominion shareholders, will go to our ratepayers in the form of investments in the grid. We also beefed up the SCC review. They get to address rates in the very first triennial review now. Of course, APCO is already out of the rate freeze. They're coming up in 2020. Their review will cover 17, 18, and 19. That's a change that they get to do it in the very first time. This RAC issue, these rate adjustment clauses that Chairman Kilgore mentioned, this is actually a really big deal. Those are the things that cause your constituents' utility bills to jump up and down wildly when they get this big new investment through the form of a RAC. This bill now smooths those payments out, and your constituents won't see those major jumps. And then a couple of other things that have gotten less attention, although Chairman Kilgore mentioned them. Chairman Marshall was a leader on these issues. The economic development and the rural broadband are major new components of this bill that are really a big deal, especially for those of us who represent rural territories. Now, we continue to have questions like, is the SCC review robust enough? Is the double dipping issue addressed? That's why While a lot of us don't necessarily want to do it on the fly, we appreciate the work that the minority leader is doing. So the point of what I'm saying is there are reasons to not think this bill is perfect. Just like when we vote on the budget in a few weeks, there's going to be reasons not to think it's perfect. But it's a very complicated bill that transforms the way we do investment in our grid in Virginia. This will truly set our grid up for the next several decades. And the bill is not the bill that was introduced. The bill has gotten much, much, much better. It probably got better on the floor today. Again, this language is tricky, but it probably got better. So what I would encourage everybody to do is recognize the bill is much better. It is better than the status quo. If you vote against this bill, then you are saying you don't want to return hundreds of millions of dollars in overpayments. You don't want to expedite the return of the tax payments that we're going to get quicker. You don't want to invest in the grid. You don't want the rural broadband. You don't want the economic development. It's better than the status quo. I hope we'll vote for this bill and then continue to rely on the stakeholders to improve the bill so that when we see it on final passage, it'll be better than it is today.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in the 13th District, which include Haymarket and Gainesville, have overwhelmingly, by a 10-to-1 margin, asked me to oppose this bill today. And I want to share some stories from out in that area in particular. And here's the thing, no matter, where we stand on this particular issue, especially regard to the transmission line, I know we want to do the best thing for our constituents in Western Prince William County. That goes for Delegate Hugo, that goes for myself, and everyone else here. I know we want to do the best. And even if we don't agree on it, at least we can agree that we're trying to do the best for our constituents. In this regard, in 2006, Dominion proposed 155-foot high power towers to go along the I-66 corridor that were to connect over to the Arcola substation in southern Loudoun County. Now, the residents of Western Prince William County at the time, particularly in Haymarket and Gainesville, protested against those lines until they were later moved down to Vint Hill Road, up the Prince William County Parkway, out into Cat Harpin, and out into Loudoun County. Now, fast forward a few years, and in 2014, this proposal came up. Now, the whole point of this proposal is to connect this roughly 6-mile transmission line, about 5 mile or so transmission line, out to a data center over in Haymarket, and that's owned by Amazon. The issue with this is that as of this moment, since the point that the SEC has reopened the case here regarding this issue, Amazon has yet to prove adequate need for this transmission line according to the SEC. As of this moment, right now, they have not proven adequate need for this. That's why in our community in Western Prince William County, no one wants 110-foot high power towers, myself included. And I can't imagine there's anyone within the Prince William delegation who would support having 110-foot high above-ground power towers going along the 66 corridor, let alone going through Somerset or Carver Road or Madison or anywhere else in this community. That said, while a lot of folks back home, have certainly talked about the hybrid route in this, and which is part of this, there's a few issues in terms of the actual wording of the legislation in regard to the hybrid route. And this is where I want to go with this. The first part of this, approval of a proposed transmission line for inclusion in this program shall not preclude the placing of existing or future overhead facilities in the same area or corridor by other transmission projects. Given that we have existing precedent for Dominion, one, to go along the I-66 corridor. Back in the 2006 case, as well as this case, what this basically says that even if the lines were to be buried along the 66 corridor, they could come back with another project to be built above ground through that corridor. That would clearly be a problem for the people of Western Prince William County who have rejected this on 2 occasions. The next part with this, the bill also states, the State Corporation Commission shall approve such underground construction within 30 days of receipt of the written request of the public utility to participate in the pilot program pursuant to this section. What is not included in there is any compulsory language or any mandate requiring Dominion to participate in the pilot program. What that basically means here is that this pilot program is opt-in for Dominion. And so when I talked to Dominion officials about this over the weekend, first this bill came out of subcommittee on Thursday night. So Friday afternoon, I met with 2 Dominion officials in my office for about 2 hours, and we talked about this. And then by this weekend, when I had a more thorough conversation with them, as well as talked to my constituents out west, they told me a few things. Number one is that there is no guarantee where the end route will actually go. We don't know what the SCC will actually rule in terms of where the routing will go, and that came from the Dominion officials themselves to me. They told me they do not know where this route will go in terms of its final trajectory here. The second part on this is that even while they don't know where that's going to go, what we do know is that the only place along the 66 corridor where you're going to have unanimous support within the area is through the existing median between the eastbound and the westbound lanes along I-66.